Hi, this is O'Connor, and I'm about to be interviewed on a podcast, but I thought I'd make this video interview anyway so we can go on YouTube and then we can all learn together because we want to reduce the mistakes that importers are making. I just want to take you through a few of the areas I want to cover, especially with respect to sourcing electronics. And my background, of course, you know, I'm an Australian, grew up on a farm, and I'm an accountant and I love making things. So back in 2010, I created the China Supplier 1000 study, in which I interviewed over 1,000 suppliers, and more recently, 2015 onwards, I've been visiting factories, auditing factories for overseas clients, and giving general advice both to clients and also to factories and help them to improve their operation, because we all need help. It is so critical these days that buyers spend a greater part of their time in working on the relationship with their suppliers. I've been advising buyers on sourcing issues. I have a video blog that's Tech Asia, 750 videos, over 40 electronics factories have been documented, and I'm co-founder of China Sourcing Academy with Mike Bellamy, and also I'm a professor, accounting CPA, head of department at Monash University Malaysia campus. So this all keeps me very, very busy, but I get excited in helping buyers do great sourcing from suppliers in China. Okay, so where is the majority of products made in China? Like, we could go over the whole gamut of products, but for this episode we want to focus on electronics, and the two big places are Zhejiang province, which is just south of Shanghai, which is the home of Alibaba, by the way, and Guangdong province, which we know Shenzhen, just across the border, is a dominant area ecosystem of electronics. What are the different types of electronics factories in China? Well, we could go from the very basic to the very, very good. So we could start with trading companies, buying agents and wholesalers. They're not really factories, but it's really, really important that you understand that these companies can pass themselves off as being the factory. So you need to beware of that and know if you are buying from an agent. It's okay to buy from an agent if they are representing themselves as an agent. We could talk about SME factory workshops. I call them workshops because basically they don't have the full gamut of testing, inspection, design, packaging, warehousing. They basically have some assembly area. They might have a room where they do some different product tests, but they don't have everything. So we call them workshops. Then you can go to the more established factories, like OEM factories, original equipment manufacturing factories, where they're actually making products for recognized brand names around the world. And we can go one step further, like an EMS provider, something like Foxconn, which does all the assembly of iPhone products, and the more the high end, much more expensive. And when you get into much, much larger volume, then you would go to one of those type of factories. But for the most part, the established factories are the go-to factories if you're looking to work on a product that you want to iterate and have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 versions over the next 5 years, and actually establish a brand name with that version, each version of product. So just keep in mind, established factories, they're going to be more expensive than SME factory workshops. And Ioni is a very, very good example of an established factory that I've visited twice now. And the original visit, they were making car video products you put in the dashboard. So in the dashboard area of your car, so you can video yourself in a car accident or another accident or whatever. But more recently, when I visited them, they're actually making noise cancelling headphones. Wow, they're doing a lot. Okay, so they got their own in-house design team. They got their own mold manufacturing. They have their own mold on one level, the SMT machines on another level, got assembly on another level. They had about 5, 6 levels in their factory, and fully fully controlled in terms of dust-free zones. You had to wear a uniform when you go in, even as a visitor. They have a design room where you can actually work with the designers in tweaking your product. So they basically have everything under one roof. So that's a good example of an OEM factory. So what differentiates a factory producing good quality products from one producing products that don't last long? Well, I'm not a chemical engineer, I'm not an electrical engineer, but there are some basics when it comes to electronics manufacturing. And if you have a battery as a component, that is probably one of the most critical parts of an electronics product. And it's so important that when you're working with suppliers that you know where the battery comes from. Of course, they're probably sourcing it from outside, but who are they sourcing it from? Do they know that supplier? What are the certifications of the supplier of the battery? Is it just got Samsung printed on it, but it's really not a Samsung battery? You need to know these things. The system in place is very, very important in the factory, and we're talking from materials receiving to assembly to final QC. What are we talking about here? At the materials receiving, a lot of factories do not spend a lot of time, they do not spend enough time on testing QC on the materials that are coming into the factory. And later on, it's a major cause of defects or rejects at the other end of the assembly line, and that costs the factory money, and that causes the factory to actually not last long because they're not doing things in a sustainable way. But looking at the electronics area, what's important is having proper packaging and the separation of components, especially in the factory area, because that could lead to electromigration problems, and there's many other problems associated with how you store components at the right temperature and how you actually have proper separation. You'll see in the good factories they actually have foam like layers holding different products or different components, and there's a grid made up of foam that is actually separating all of the components, and then they put on top of each other, but there's a foam in between, keeping that separation, stopping electromigration problems. Even during the process, we can talk about the soldering process, the anti-static. Wristbands are very critical for this process. Finger gloves, the use of finger gloves. So many factories where they don't use finger gloves. It's amazing how much moisture comes out of our hands when we are working in the factory, and the moisture gets into the product, and then that can cause problems later on. Dust-free zones is very, very critical, keeping dust out of the assembly area. And there was one factory, a smartwatch factory, they actually took their smartwatches out of the dust-free zone into the office area so they could test the Bluetooth, so it didn't interfere with other radio waves and frequency activity going on in the dust-free zone. And I said, why'd you take it in the office area? There's so much dust there. You should keep everything in the dust-free zone. Okay, OEM relationship is another area that you can identify a good factory. If they have an OEM relationship with an established brand name in Japan, in US, in Germany, etc., you could really tell that this factory has actually gone through the ISO 9000, all the proper procedures they should be going through to manufacture electronic products. The design house I talked about, Ioni, if they have a design house, that makes the factory even more credible because they have invested a lot of capital in making sure that they do their own designs. That means they appreciate IP more. If they're doing their own designs, they're less likely going to share their IP with other factories or other suppliers in China. And of course, finally, the owner. If you get to meet the owner or know the owner, and if you know that they are obsessive about making the best product in the world, like Steve Jobs, then you can really tell that that factory is a very good one. What advice do you have for someone just starting to source electronics from China? Okay, start basic. That's my big advice. Begin with a one-off-the-shelf product. In other words, do not try and start with a product that you want to tweak. It's better to go to a factory that already has a product that they can sell you off the shelf. It means they've already manufactured it. It means they've already worked through the problems in manufacturing it and hopefully ironed out any QC problems. And you can actually see the product for yourself and actually get it tested before you send it to your market, and you can get up and running in a matter of weeks. If you start to go down the design process where you tweak something, it may take months to get something going. By the time you go through the design process, the sampling stage, the testing stage, laboratory tests required, it's going to take you much longer to get up and running. So stay away from that, because there's much more steps you need to go through, hoops you need to jump through to actually get a viable product into the market. Also, use a trading company if you cannot travel, especially COVID. Use a trading company. Why? Because 20% they may charge you more, but that's a huge weight and risk off your shoulders. That means you become the importer of record into the United States, but the trading company is actually taking responsibility for making sure that that product is okay. They're taking responsibility for the quality, everything, tests done and everything. So therefore, you're liable as importer of record, but you're importing as a company, but you can actually have recourse with the trading company. It's hard to have recourse with a factory in China if something goes wrong. Work with an OEM factory that has a real established relationship with brand names. Like I said, Aoni, but there's many around. And so if you know that they have made goods for other established brand names, you know that they have invested in the good processes that they should be following. And it's more likely that they'll have the certifications required for electronics in USA. There's special laws in California, Prop 65, but also then there's the FCC, then there's the UL standards also that you need to be aware of. Look for a factory that already has FCC, UL and C certifications. You do not want to be the first customer asking for such certifications. And just remember, when it comes to certification, that there are intentional and unintentional radiators. If your product has some kind of cellular device in it, or it's a laser product, or some sun lamps or smartwatch or Bluetooth or Wi-Fi products, they're intentional radiators, and it's more likely you need to go through a full FCC process. That is, you need to get lab test and you need to certify, get it full FCC certified, and that's going to cost you a few $1,000 US to do that. But if it's an unintentional radiator, like home heating, electrical tools, a vacuum cleaner, ceiling fan, white goods, then especially if they're low voltage, then all you have to do is get a verification of compliance with FCC, or at least a declaration of conformity. You don't need to have a full certification. But for the most part, step back from that, look for factories that have already got the certification. You don't want to be the first customer that goes to the factory and asks for certification with that factory. If you cannot visit, ask for a reference from another customer. Ask the factory to give you a reference from one of their customers. Maybe that customer is in another country, not in the country you're importing into, and that is very important. You can do that. Don't pay any money unless you have to. Don't pay any money unless you have verified the business license, you have a reference, you have conducted a factory audit, and hopefully had FaceTime communications with the factory multiple times. Don't just rely on email, and don't just buy the first product they show you. Okay? And please don't focus on price as an indication of the best factory out there. The good factories are going to be 10, 20, 30% more expensive than the bad factories. What are some ways in which suppliers cut corners and compromise quality? Very, very interesting. On materials receiving inspection, I've already mentioned that. Outsourcing without telling you. So do have a clear conversation with them about this, like our having in the contract that our auditor is allowed to visit the outsourced factory. Process shortcuts, a poor setup of the assembly line for workers to do a consistent job, or separation of electronics components, burn-in room tests. This takes time, 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. So they may actually shorten the time that the burn-in tests are undertaken, and so they may not cause products to fail when they should fail if they're burned in for the proper time period. They may replace lower quality products like batteries inside your product without you knowing about. Or the real scam artists may, a real example of a power bank product, instead of putting 10,000 milliamp hour battery in your 10,000 milliamp power bank product, they may put in a 5,000 milliamp hour battery and then fill the rest of the cavity with sand to give you the impression that it's still the same weight. Wow, can they do that? Yes, they can. They do that. What services do you offer, and how can people reach me? Well, this is an interesting question. Well, I do advisory and consulting, and I help with sourcing with partners across the border. I work with several other sourcing agents and also consultants. So I do connect buyers with appropriate people that I feel have the right connections. And also I have the China Sourcing Academy with Mike Bellamy, and it's our bronze course. That's 11 hours of training plus templates for anyone starting, especially in electronics. Mike and I take beginners through the sourcing process so you don't get scammed. And we normally charge $199 for this course, but for this month and for listeners of this podcast now and also this video, if you use the code China39 and go to Udemy, type in China Sourcing, you'll see our course has been the top ranked course in Udemy, and you can get the whole 11 hours of training for $39. So if you have any queries on that, you can send me a direct email by neale@ricebox.com. That is Neale, Neale, at ricebox.com. Hope to see you in the academy. Hope to see you if you've got any queries about sourcing from China. If I can help in any way, do get in touch with me. This is O'Connor, and happy sourcing. Bye for now.